almost a full moon. It's quiet where I'm at. I'm down in North Carolina. It's been a very strange few days. Normally I have a lot more to talk about, but recently I haven't had a whole lot to say. Usually when I get like that, it's because I'm observing, I'm taking things in, and I'm considering what they mean, where we're at, and what is occurring, and what is likely to occur. Now that said, one would have to be utterly in denial to think that the world is right, that things are okay. We have a time period that we are living in that is borderline personality-like in its absurdity and insanity. And as I'm walking around a neighborhood that's still being built. The prices are pretty high for the type of construction in the area that it's being built. The materials are cheap, and the construction is shoddy. You know what that tells me? Greed. America's highest virtue has become profit margin. Not doing things right. Profit margin. You know, the irony is that we have on our money "In God We Trust." It's the national motto. And at one time, the reason why it was put on there was to remind people that money was not God. God was God. And God is God. But we live in a time period where God has become money. It's pretty clear to see. People are lovers of money, and the hearts of many grow cold because of the abuses that are done, the avarice and hubris associated with greed, which is an addiction. So it shouldn't shock anybody that when there's rampant greed in a society, there's also rampant addictions in a society. And the greedy make money off of the addictions, never seeing that they themselves are addicts to money. How ironic. But more is never enough, is it? That's the nature of addiction. More is never enough. Same thing with power, with influence. More is never enough. In the pursuit of elusive contentment, we run ourselves ragged, pursuing the shadows of things that will never satisfy. You know what that says to me? We're a spiritually desolate people. We pursue all that is temporary, fleeting, trying to fill an infinite space with temporary things. And we continue to do it, though it never satisfies, expecting different results every time we cycle around. Now, don't we? Now, that's the definition of insanity. One can apply the same thing to pride. Pride is the ultimate addiction. Great way to look at that is to look at our policies in government, foreign and domestic. And it shouldn't be missed that what comes with that power to make those decisions is a lot of money and influence, all of which are exploitable by even more unprincipled addicts. That's why I say that for it is for people, so too it is for nations. Take China, for instance. More is never enough. More will never ever satisfy the CCP. If they were to swallow the whole universe, they would still be a bottomless pit. Because they're in a lie. Their foundations are built on a lie. Their civilization is built on a lie. Their governance is built on a lie. Everything about them is a lie. Except their pride. Their pride is real. It's about the only thing they'll have left when they're burning in the lake of fire. But they won't be alone. That's where the pursuit of more leads. Dissipation and ultimately your destruction. And it's ruled by fear and confusion. It's pathological, and ultimately it's a terminal condition. It's an addiction that will swallow you whole. So here we are in a time period in the world where everything that could be has been co-opted by the pandemic of greed, pride, avarice, and hubris. Is it any wonder? See, the dangerous thing about the prideful and the fearful and the confused, when they're in power, is they create conditions which, when they backfire or they start to come undone, they have one of two choices. They can accept responsibility for their actions, or they can hold on to their pride. And if they hold on to their pride and refuse to admit their responsibility, well, what they do is pretty obvious. They blame other people. They're offended when they're busted, when they're caught in their lies, because they prefer their pride to accepting responsibility for their own actions. That's running rampant in our times. It's destroying the world, and it's leading all the nations to a point in history where destruction will rule. How's that working for you? You know, one of the things that's amazing in the times that we're in is how few authentic and real conversations you can have with people, because people are so closed-minded. They are so apprehended by their own fear, confusion, and pride. Such a world is destined for disaster. Such a person is destined for disaster. Such a nation is destined for disaster. You are in a time where the wisdom of man and works of the mortal coils are held up in the highest esteem, while the wisdom of God and saving knowledge is cast down and trampled underfoot. I can tell you where that ends. A graveyard. You do not realize how fragile all of this actually is. How fragile this entire society is. And how fragile your reality actually is. You know, what makes a nation strong is not its armaments. It's not its wealth or power or influence. Like a human being, like a person, it's its character. What it believes in. What it stands for. What it's willing to fight for, and how it's willing to do that. When you live in times where people are selfish, the nation reflects that in its leadership, because as for people, so too it is for nations. And as the leaders are, it's reflected in the people. So where are we at as a country? We're a disaster. We're an utter disaster. We're arrogant, we're foolish, we're ignorant, and we're blind. We're rebellious, we're sick, and on top of that, we refuse to acknowledge the truth of our predicament. What denial does is it drives you to rerun the old playbooks that don't work. This is particularly true in government. There's a point at which the law of diminishing returns hits a terminus point, and it starts to work against you when you try to rerun what has already not worked. And an addiction cycle, right? When a point is hit where the addict has consumed so much of the substance, drugs and alcohol, that they've had to increase the amounts of, there's a point at which they go and do it one last time and they think it's going to be the same effect, right? But they drop dead. They've hit a 0 point. That point is terminus. It's a trap. So too it is with policies, with governance, and with national maladies. Can you not see this as a nation, America? Do you think that you are immune from falling, failing, and being destroyed? Because if you think that, the chances of that actually occurring and you being proven wrong are exponentially high. If you realize that, you realize at least some inkling of your predicament, it would be evident in humility and a willingness to accept responsibility and work with others who want to help you out of your predicament and make a difference for the entire nation. But there's a point at which a nation goes so far down that even their own systems prevent that from occurring. In a sense, it locks them in to a terminal cycle. Your bureaucracy in government, your lack of effective, humble, and cogent leadership, your over-reliance on what you think you know, is deceiving you. And it's leading you down a path to your destruction. Now, how can I say that? Well, a great indicator for that is when your leadership, which is charged with protecting this country and upholding the law, become lawless, and in denial that you have hostile powers among you and in nation states around you that are already waging war against you, and they deny it. And what happens in that case? Well, the people die. That's precisely what's been going on for a long time. There's a point at which you have to admit that you have a problem, and pride prevents that from occurring. And it creates the conditions for your fall. And when the darkness comes in as thick as you see it now in our times, what occurs is confusion and fear prevent those who have been prepared and are capable of helping you out of that predicament from being able to do so, thereby sealing your fate. And what is fear? False evidence appearing real. It's a lie. You're bound to a lie. That's what pride is. Pride blinds you to your predicament. That means you're self-deceived. You're being deceived. So the war that's being waged against you is death by 1,000 cuts. It's been going on for quite some time. And there are many among you that are complicit with it. So what do you think the consequences of that is going to be? I can tell you. Currently, you have far too many people in positions of power and leadership in this country, and the civilian and within national security, that are blind. They're either complicit or they're in arrogance and pride, or they're ignorant and incompetent and should never have been in the positions they're in to begin with, regardless of how they got there. It's the timing of it that is important. The timing of it leads to a diversity of vulnerabilities that are being exploited right under your nose. Another indicator of this is that when you turn against the people that are trying to warn you, you mitigate them, you scapegoat them, you abuse them, you plunder them, thereby cutting off your own lifeline. That is, in a sense, national suicide. Now, here in America, you choose your leaders. So that means you are also culpable for the choices they make because you put them there. And everywhere I go, I see the wreckage of their decisions. And I see it already affecting you, and it's killing you. It's destroying you. But you don't want to hear anything about God. Because you know better, right? You'd rather mock that. You'd rather say that that is an old-fashioned or mythological construct. Yet you're dying and about to die in great numbers. And it isn't going to be COVID that does it. Because you choose your pride over humility. You choose lies and your selfishness and your addictions over truth and freedom. And worse yet, you want to enslave the rest of the people among you that have not chosen that, refuse that, and don't want that for their children. That's not going to end very well for you. But you see, your fear drives you to grab more power, more control, and lord it over people. What you don't understand is that is only exposing your position, weakening you, and creating the conditions for you to be destroyed. So I'm going to tell some of you, you will be plundered the way that you've plundered the rest of us. You'll be mitigated and destroyed the way that you've done everyone else. You will pay the consequences in full measure of your arrogance, your pride, your avarice, and your hubris if you do not change your trajectory and accept responsibility for your predicament. No nation on earth, no, not one, is righteous. Just like there's not one single human being that is righteous in their own works. But that's abhorrent to many of you. So I see increasingly blame being put on Christians, evangelical Christians at that. How ironic that many of the people that are doing that are themselves at one time or another sitting in a pew in a church or going to a synagogue or a mosque or some other religious context when they're not virtue signaling and trying to force that on everybody else. This is not about the left or right. This is about your heart and your mind. And if you do not comprehend that, then you are truly lost and in darkness. And I can tell you that's so. Because I see evidence of it everywhere I go. From the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top. You are in late stage illness as a nation. You've been warned and warned and warned. You've been offered treatment, a pathway out, and people to help you, but you refuse it. So why should everybody else pay the cost for your rebellion, your arrogance, your ignorance, your foolishness, your pride, and your chosen path to follow a lie? You see, you're sacrificing everything that you've taken the shadow of instead of accepting the authentic thing. And a shadow has no substance. It has no permanence. And it's always cast on the ground away from a light source. But you like your false light here, don't you? You love your counterfeits here, don't you? Well, your entire nation is running like a drunk whore. And that will not end well. Everything here will be made an accounting for. Everything here will be exposed, including everybody who's in positions of power. All of it will be exposed. Not only from within, but your enemies will do it. Because they stand to gain something by doing it. I told you if you went the way of Babylon, you would pay the price. If you decided that you wanted to go and do that, and you wanted to go down that path is broad and it leads to your destruction. There will be no more safe places for you to hide. See, while everybody's talking about peace and security, and have been, it was a false peace, and there was no security in it because you've been dying and being destroyed. You've been being murdered in what I said earlier is death by 1,000 cuts. But you don't want to call that war, because that requires a moment of cogent reality where you have to actually look at yourself and accept responsibility for your predicament, which got you here in the first place because of your denial and pride. You've made a mockery of everything that you say you believe. You have no credibility. Your country's been devoured by others, and even by your own. And they didn't just stop with you, because they're bottomless pits. More is never enough, and they're addicts too. And they're eating everybody else as well, until the blowback comes, until the consequences arrive. When it comes to nation states, that's usually world war. Now you're already in that. The world is not a chessboard. It's a field. Like a battlefield. And when the weeds take over the field, it turns into a battlefield. And it gets scorched. Because when the weeds take over a field, it's not productive anymore. It cannot produce anything of value. And weeds take all the resources away from the good plantings that need them. They need those resources to grow. Choking them out. As it is for weeds, so too it is for people. So too it is for people, so too it is for nations. And of course, when you're doing plantings, you use a broadcaster to broadcast the seed. Well, everybody's got the ability to broadcast whatever seed they want now, don't they? With all our technology, how's that working for you? What's real? That's what I hear all the time. What's actually real? Very little is real. You live in a world of synthetics. That's the consequences of refusing the truth, not seeking it, and choosing lies in your pride and your avarice and your hubris. You create a darkness. There's a consequence to sowing bad seed. And people aren't the only ones doing it. Nation states are doing it. Tribes, tongues, nations, right? People groups of all kinds. Political, religious, secular, every kind of ideology. But the whole world's already on fire. Hard to grow anything when everything's burning. But you don't see that yet. Because by the time you see that, it'll be the same time that you realize that you're in a war, and that war has been being fought against you for a very, very long time. And instead of fighting that war, you fought the people that were warning you and trying to wake you up to your predicament, thereby creating the conditions for the obvious version of war as you know it to metastasize and become obvious in the scene. So what you refuse to listen to and consider in the unseen, once it becomes seen, the die is cast, the consequences occur. That's where you're at. You're on the edge of that. Most Americans think that no one would ever invade America. America never fall. Every empire thought that. The rest of the world doesn't have to invade you. You're already being invaded. Sleeper cells, the drug cartels' operations, state actors, your own criminal gangs, the rot that's among you. You've been invaded with drugs, false ideologies, lies, diversion, and pathogens. When you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. There are those of you that think it is ignorant that I'm somehow less intellectual, unthinking, backwards, because I tell you that all the nations are going to be judged for this. You keep right on telling yourself that. And you can keep right on telling yourself that right until you follow your shadow into a grave. But you're in a war. And in a war, there's but three kinds of people: soldiers, prisoners, and casualties. You're already one of those three. And if you're one of those three, you're probably already two of them, and you'll be all three eventually. Same thing goes for your leaders. You see, they dismember what can be from those of us that are here in the middle, and they misapply it because they've misappropriated it, and in misapplying it, right, they misuse it, they mislead themselves and others, and they bear the consequences for how they've used it. And they do that because they refuse to let go. And in this case, you put them there. So you'll be sharing in that fate. And what most of you do, you'll turn against the leaders. You'll do anything but accept responsibility for your own actions, your own choices, at your own peril. The signs are everywhere. If you don't see them now, it's because you don't want to see them. If you don't understand that now, in your heart of hearts, that means you're probably already a casualty. And that means your body just has to catch up with that. And it's a prisoner, and you're a proxy soldier against those of us that are warning you what your fate's going to be. You are sowing the wind, and you will reap the whirlwind. There's a reason why battlefields are filled with the bones of the dead. That's what you're heading to. And that's what your world already is. And that's what this nation already is and has been for quite some time. You're running out of time. You're at your crossroads, and you've chosen unwisely. Duplicitous people do duplicitous things. And they reap duplicitous results. That is the way of Babylon. That's why it's judged double. All of your technology will turn against you. Everything that you put your hand to will not prosper in what's coming because you've done it through misappropriation, misapplication, misuse, right? And misled yourself and others. You have one way out, and that is to humble yourselves, take responsibility for your actions, and ask God to save you. Because you cannot save yourself from your predicament now. But if you choose that path, the truth will set you free. I'm not talking about being religious. I'm talking about being real. Outward forms of religion and ideology and practice will have no bearing on your status. The orientation of your heart and mind will. And unless the truth is in you, you're a slave to a lie. And you're too blind to see that until sudden destruction comes upon you, even as you're crying out for peace and security. But a false peace is never a real peace, and it never brings security. A false peace is always war in disguise and insecurity, and ultimately destruction. And I said earlier tonight that I'm not sure that this country can survive what it's going to go through. I know it won't if you are continuing to deny your predicament. A remnant will be preserved through it, but the nation itself will not survive. That's the cost of pride. And that's the end state of going the way of Babylon. So consider these things I told you in light of why it is I always say, as it is for people, so too it is for the nation.